Welcome to In the Arena. I'm your host, Mindy McAlindon, an Arkansas State Representative, a businesswoman, and a mom of four. On this podcast, we're tackling issues that impact you, your family, and your community. Each week, I'll sit down with prominent leaders from local trailblazers to national figures to discuss the most pressing topics of our time. We'll explore policy, faith, education, and so much more. Whether you're a community advocate, a concerned citizen, or simply someone who wants to stay informed, this podcast is for you. So together, we'll cover insights, share stories, and spark conversations that matter. Thank you for joining me on this journey to inspire leadership and build a stronger future. This is In the Arena, so let's get started. Today we have on our show a good friend of mine and the National Committeeman from Vermont, Mr. Jay Shepard. He has served in several leadership roles within the state of Vermont and has served on the National Republican Committee for the last 12 years. Outside of the RNC, Jay is known for his strong advocacy on several issues such as being pro-life, as well as First and Second Amendments. But my favorite fact about Jay, and probably my son's favorite fact as well, is that Jay is an avid Boston Red Sox fan. So let's bring Jay on.
Hi, Mindy. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, Jay. It's great to see you.
I want to know how someone from Arkansas has a son that's a Boston Red Sox fan.
You know, it's Little League, and they would name the Little League teams after the MLB teams, and he won the championship when his team was named the Red Sox, and that has been his team ever since.
That's great. I had a similar experience with my daughters when we did T-ball one year, and I was coaching, and they asked me to coach the Yankees in T-ball, and I said, "No, that's just not going to work."
Oh, yeah.
You know,
no Red Sox fan can coach a Yankees team.
Right. Those hats are not going to work in my household. So, especially, if my kids want to go in that direction, that's up to them. But as the coach, I could not be wearing a Yankee hat and a Yankee shirt.
I understand that completely. Well, Jay, let's jump right in. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Vermont and always been involved in local politics. It really makes a difference to be involved in your community. And my background is more in the background. I was an elected official for a short period of time when I was 22 years old and realized that that was not something that I wanted to do. I'm a little bit impatient with people who have questions and issues about things that I think they should be able to handle on their own. And the detail about people's problems, sometimes they're overwhelming for me. So my work has been mostly to support people who are very good at leadership, people who want to run for office that are doing it for all the right reasons. But we have become very important for me to be involved in issues. And I think you mentioned the pro-life issue really is the driving force in what made me involved in politics. Because I think if you start with life, you're starting on the right foot. And if you don't believe in the sanctity of life and the promise of the unborn, then it's really, really difficult to believe in anything else. So that's the driving force. I was fortunate in Vermont, and people kind of encouraged me to, it's a small state, you might want to get involved in a little bit more. And so I ran to be National Committeeman for Vermont back in 2012. And it was the perfect timing for me because my youngest had just graduated from high school. And it was a time, I always said that I'm going to get more involved in politics once my kids are sick of me. So when the youngest graduated from high school, it was time to, be more involved. And fortunately, I was elected and reelected a couple more times. And at one time, for 5 years, I was actually vice chair of the RNC, which was pretty exciting, being on the executive committees and running some of the regional meetings, which was very, very good. So that's my background. Those are the things I'm still involved in. I will always be involved in the life issues. Always be involved in certain issues, First Amendment, Second Amendment, all those things that are important.
Well, that is great. Let me jump back real quick. So you ran for office at 22 years old. That's pretty young to make a decision like that and to get elected. It's quite impressive, actually. So tell me about that. Did you run? Was that a nonpartisan race? And why did you decide to run?
Well, it is a partisan race. It's in Vermont. They're called selectmen. You're on the select board, which is like a city council. So we had a small council. There was only 3 members on the board. 2 people. Every vote was 2-1 because they didn't always agree with me. I was always the conservative Republican in the bluest of blue states in Vermont. But I really wanted to make a difference. And I had always been involved in town politics. So I had just moved back to Vermont after college and decided to be involved again. When I was still in high school, I was actually chair of the Young Republicans in Vermont, which was interesting. I ran against a longtime incumbent for the select board. I walked doors, knocked on every door in the district, and it really made a difference that people actually saw there was someone who would actually knock on their door. And so I think when people talk about running for election, whether it's, in Arkansas or Vermont, if you're running for local office, you need to knock on doors. You need to let people know who you are. And one of the quotes I always use is back from Tip O'Neill, who was not a conservative, but he said in his first book that most people vote for someone because someone asked them to. So it's more than just knocking on the door and trying to educate people. It's about getting them to like you, and people want to do things for you. So you ask them that favor. Will you support me so I can support you? Can I count on you voting for me? And in most cases, you're the only one that's ever asked them that question. So it's very, very important. And I learned that at a very young age, reading a Tip O'Neill book, which, my favorite Tip O'Neill quote, however, is when he met Ronald Reagan for the first time in D.C. when Reagan was elected. And he said, Mr. President, I was here when you got here, and I'll be here when you leave. And that was certainly the case.
There probably aren't a lot of 18-year-olds that were reading Tip O'Neill, so I just hats off to you for that.
Yeah, obviously I didn't have any friends.
Yeah, that's all right. You've done very well. So let's talk a little bit about being a Republican in Vermont, because as you mentioned, Vermont is a very deep blue state. Your legislature, I think you just lost the supermajority, but you still have a significant majority of Democrats in your House and Senate. And so how do you get things done as a Republican in Vermont?
You have to pick and choose, and you look at issues. As a matter of fact, this past year, we flipped more seats than any other state in the country. So we flipped 21 seats, which sounds like a great deal, but in a House situation where there's 150 seats, we only had 36 prior to this year. So we're actually getting some one chairmanship of one of the committees, which is kind of exciting and interesting. And now we have a Republican governor who's a very liberal Republican, but he has set the record for most vetoes. And in most cases, the legislature has overridden every one of his vetoes. So what we're able to do now is sustain vetoes, which is very, very important in a blue state like this. And it wasn't until this year that we've been able to. But the opportunities are there to convince people and to move people. So elections don't happen in 6 weeks. They happen over the course of 2 years. So you want to be up front and you want to be talking about the issues and what moves people and the table talk issues. Unfortunately, in Vermont, it's more difficult. President Trump, who's doing a fantastic job nationwide, and I know he did a great job in Arkansas, Vermont gave him the fewest number of votes in the country. So in spite of these people having these misconceptions about what the Republican Party is and misconceptions about President Trump, we were able to overcome those issues because we were talking about pocketbook issues. And there was an article out today that Vermont is the least affordable state in the country, that the difference between wages and costs, it has the biggest gap in Vermont. So we need to talk about things that people care about. And we don't want to talk about the big issues as much as we want to talk about the potholes and the taxation and affordability.
Are you seeing that your state representatives or your state senators are wanting to stay focused on the big issues? I know we see that a lot in Arkansas, where sometimes it's more fun to talk about the big issues than it is sometimes to dig into the really nitty-gritty issues.
We have in the past seen that they want to talk about the big issues and all of that. And when you're going door to door and when you're speaking to people, you want to make sure they understand that you can only affect what's local, that you want to be their representative and you want to care. And too many people that run for office, especially some of us Republicans, that, we're right. We know what the issues are and we need to educate people. The job of running for office is not about educating people. It's about supporting them and helping them. And you can't support and help them unless you listen to them. So when you go door to door, or you speak to people at the supermarket, or you speak to people at Walmart, you speak to them about the issues that affect them on a day-to-day basis. And quite honestly, what's happening in the Ukraine is a big deal. And it's something we should be concerned about. But your kids don't care about the Ukraine if you don't have food on the table for them to eat. They don't care about China if your kids are wondering if they're going to be able to go to camp in the summer. You don't care about what's going on in Panama or the Middle East if your car isn't starting in the morning. So it's really vital that we talk about the issues that people live with every day. And we talk about the tabletop issues and those kind of things. And it's just so much easier for me to sit here and solve all the world's problems than it is to figure out why the school bus didn't come today and pick up my kids.
Yeah, it is tough when you start digging into those issues. So let's look forward a little bit. As we see in a couple weeks, President Trump will be inaugurated and will become our 47th president. And I think people have been really excited. You can tell just the business community, international leaders have already started making changes in anticipation of him being in office. What do you think? How do you think this will impact Vermont specifically, and maybe your community more specifically, in terms of the issues that you're going to be talking about or issues that will be taken up in this legislative session?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to make sure we do is we have to continue to talk about Vermont issues. And I think you being in a deep red state is different, where you can afford to talk about some of the bigger issues, the national issues, and those kind of things, where we really very much have to focus on local here. One of the things that's really important that you're noticing worldwide is the fact that a lot of countries believe Donald Trump is the president already. They're responding to what's coming up, what's going to happen. We've seen what happened in Canada, where they've said, we need to do better. We need a Donald Trump in Canada to make Canada better. We're seeing in the Middle East, we're seeing Putin finally deciding, we're going to have to settle this thing. I can't keep coming over and killing Ukrainians, at will. So we're looking at the world saying, we need to focus and we need to do better, that we can't take advantage of the United States anymore. Unfortunately, President Biden is still in office and he's doing executive orders. He's making all kinds of changes that will be washed away. And, I think it's another situation where it's virtue signaling more than reality. So we're going to be able to overturn those kind of things and get back to a country of laws, where what makes our country great is the fact that we're exceptional and that we have a foundation of laws. And we need to make sure that this country is safe. And when we look at safety, we want to talk about a bunch of issues. So safety is a huge issue, I think. One is crime and punishment is part of safety, but it's bigger than that. It's economic security. We want to make sure that we're able to secure a future for our family and our kids, and even those in retirement, the most vulnerable. And I think we need to talk about the most vulnerable in society, which for me is the unborn and senior citizens. Being a senior citizen myself, you start to understand a little bit more about how vulnerable you are to changes in inflation and those kind of things.